in Phoenix, and Pam came to the door with her boyfriend, and she said, "What did Stacy tell you about me?" And I said, "I don't know, I'm just supposed to talk to you." And she said, "That's good." Came walking in the house. And Pam was an experiencer, a lifetime experiencer, had many, many bizarre stories of encounter from childhood. And she went on, and she's a remote viewer and worked for the government and this and that. And I listened to all this stuff, and I thought, oh, this is very, very interesting. And then suddenly she said to me, she said, "Oh, and I fly the craft." And at that point, this is 2013, I was like 37 years into my career. I'd never heard anything so stupid in my life. I said, "You flew the craft?" "Yep." "You flew the flying saucer?" I said. She said, "Yeah, I've flown 3 different models." And it was that point I said, "So how do you fly a flying saucer?" And she said, "You do it with your mind." And she led me down a path, and I now have 50 people that I have either documented cases or people that I've actually talked to, and a lot of them I put on my White House UFO YouTube channel. And everybody describes what Pam first described to me in 2013. You become one with the craft. You put your hand on a panel, and her story was borne out by a number of other witnesses. So I'm honored to have known Pam, and I'm just going to play a little clip now, a little 2-minute clip that Pam talks here about her encounter starting in the 1950s on how she was taught to fly the craft. And then we'll get to my friends here. And my apologies to Gary Hesseltine, who we were supposed to do tonight, but because I had to go back to the Spruce Hill Lodge, we had to cancel. We'll have Gary on down the road, and we're going to talk about his new movie and his work as a policeman doing UFO investigation. So my apologies here. Here now is Pam Dupuis talking about flying a flying saucer.
Got older, and then was introduced to the ships in my teens. First, the very crude ones. The head pieces were large, cumbersome metal things that fit over. And a couple of years later, they were small, almost not noticeable on your head. And a few years after that, there was nothing. It was to connect directly with the ship. It's a very difficult thing to describe because there's no words that we have for that experience. So the nearest thing I could say is we are functioning as one. It senses and knows, and I sense and know when it's experiencing, when it's thinking.
Okay. Now, we're just going to have a little round table here. I'll introduce my friends. Dave Scott from Spaced Out Radio. Welcome to my show. I was on your show a few times. Welcome to my show.
I have to admit, this is a little bit of an honor for me because you are a hero of mine, and I've made that very public to you and to my audience as well. So to be able to now be on your show where you're asking me questions, this is a little bit different, so I got to get used to this, but thank you so much.
And my other guest here is Michael Hill. He's the paranormal lawyer, and he had many very interesting stories. We were actually driving together. He was the one that was driving me to the airport, and now we're back. It's almost like it was kind of a joke because some of the other speakers had tried to leave this afternoon, and they had problems with their car, and they just left a few minutes ago. So it's almost like a haunted sort of a conference where they don't want to let people go. You got to keep going back again. So here's my friend Michael Hill. Welcome to my show.
Hey, Grant, thank you very much for allowing me to tag along with you here to Dave Scott's studio. And this is amazing because I'm looking out the window right now, and it is totally snowing still. I'm hoping we're going to get out tomorrow.
I should make a correction. It's Michael Hall. I'm very familiar with Michael Hill, who is the guy that did the Anunnaki, who's has these bizarre, I've interviewed him a number of times. So Michael Hall. Now, I'll get Dave to describe the conference that he ran and some of the speakers that were there, and then we'll go from there.
Wonderful, thank you. It was a great weekend up here in the Caribou region until the snow started falling. And, you know, it's funny because up here in Canada, this part, on October 1st, you have to have your snow tires on your vehicles. So we really didn't have time to get our snow tires on. But nonetheless, the snow is falling, and that's what happens at this time of year, and everybody's wondering, what the hell do we do now? Because there's forests out there that have wood that you have to collect for your winter hot stove. So it's something that, yes, we do have electricity and gas heat up here, but nothing beats a good wood stove. So it was a great conference. Thank you so much, Grant, for coming and being our keynote speaker about disclosure. We had a great event put on by Spaced Out Radio and the Canadian Society of Questers, and we had a great lineup of people. Some of them you may know, some are first time speaking at conferences, but we had a gentleman named Tyson Bannigan who was talking and teaching people how to use dowsing rods. Now, I've never used them, but that's kind of cool little piece of natural history there that I think is forgotten. We had Eric Cooper from Forest Moon Paranormal in Washington State, where they talk about paranormal emergencies. And when they use the word paranormal, they use it in a roundabout way, like it's a tree. And, you know, there's different branches of the paranormal, whether it's UFOs, ghosts, aliens, Bigfoot, it doesn't matter. And they dealt with a lot of cases that they were talking about. We also had Lorian Fenton come on from the Fenton perspective, where she talked a little bit about disclosure to lead into you, Grant, the night before, which was very interesting. And then we capped off Friday night with a very entertaining ghost tour. And for people who've heard my show before, you'll hear me talk about our ghost tour that we do at the local museum that's considered one of the most haunted locations here in British Columbia. And people like David Weatherly, Ross Allison had a great time here. It was led by Mike Morin from the Haunted Crew of Canada, who put everybody through the tour. It was fantastic. We had a lady named Paisley Town from Vancouver talking about numerology. David Weatherly and Ross Allison then had a great presentation on Saturday afternoon before you about haunted objects and haunted dolls, which was just stimulating. And one of the dolls that they talked about there was Mandy the Haunted Doll. And Grant, you and I had the opportunity to drive up to Quesnel, British Columbia, which is about 2 hours north of us, with David and Ross to actually meet this doll. You got to admit, it was kind of weird.
Yeah, it was kind of strange to go to because people have to realize this wasn't just a UFO conference; it was a paranormal conference. And Dave was kind enough to bring us in a day early, and we went up to see the haunted dolls. I didn't even know there was such a thing as haunted dolls, and there was actually two of them in there. There was the one in the carriage and the one in this Mandy. And then we went from there to Barkerville, which is a town that I've always wanted to visit. It's a big gold town. And we went there, and we went from building to building, and Dave basically has all the inside, and this place is haunted, and that place is haunted. And it was just a fascinating time to spend a day where you're really not really doing the conference thing, where you're actually moving around and seeing stuff in the vicinity. So as this is a paranormal conference, I'll go to my paranormal lawyer here and get him to give his input on the conference and what he thinks and how many requests he got. He actually made an offer, and I took him up on the offer. He said, anybody needs any sort of legal stuff. So I gave him one legal thing that we're sort of fighting with, and I'll get his comments on what he thinks of the conference and how it went for him.
Yeah, thanks, Grant. This is a treat for me, actually, to come up here and go to an international conference in BC. And I was real surprised to hear some of the wonderful speakers. There was a gentleman who spoke about health and holistic medicine. That was kind of fascinating. And the numerology talk was very fascinating as well. The idea that even our names that we were born with kind of reflect on something that's going to happen or will be in our personality. That was fantastic. And then, of course, one of the highlights for me, other than Grant Cameron's speech and talk, was that we had a really cool Skywatch on Saturday night. The UFO I-Team members that were here, Trish and Carol and myself and Grant and Dave Scott. Matter of fact, I've even gotten some video of Dave spotting a big flash up in the sky that Grant saw again as to confirm it, and I got that on tape. That's something I'm going to cherish for a long time.
Yeah, and I didn't tell Dave this, but last night they all went to the ghost tour, and I'm going to ask Dave in a second what happened at the ghost tour, because there's actually Dave does a lot of stuff with ghosts and has a lot of pretty reliable subjects that show up to entertain or whatever you want to call it. Last night I'm standing on the balcony because I picked up a cold, and last night was sort of the worst part of the cold, and so I was lucky enough. Dave's wife Jolene got me a view of the sort of the hillside, sort of the scenic view, and I was standing out on my balcony last night, and there over the forest, it looked like in the morning there's fog. You can see this fog there, and it looked like fog, and yet it was lit up. And I was looking from where the light was coming, and there was three sections of love, like light, almost like and I haven't even really asked Dave about this, whether there's anything back there, but sort of a tunnel of light going up, but it was like fog type light. It wasn't very defined edges. Then there was a smaller section, and then there was a third section, and this whole thing was lit up. And I looked at it from 1 hour to the next hour, and I was looking at the light coming from the cottages and stuff to see whether it. And no, there wasn't. And it was basically like pure forest back there, and this bizarre sort of almost like what people describe like the Zendra thing, where it's sort of like air that is a fog that is sort of lit up. It was sort of a whitish color with these yellow sort of lights, and it almost looked like either someone had a campfire going back there, and then the light was coming up into the because it was raining last night, so there's a lot of humidity in the air, and yet an hour later it was still there, and then the light really was nothing coming from the cabins going down in that direction. The whole entire sky, everything was totally black except for this one, and it was a fairly big section, maybe 20 degrees of the horizon in the forest. So we did have a bizarre sighting next night, and I guess I have to open up that I actually saw this. I didn't know whether I'd do it or not. It may be some natural phenomena, but it was very, very bizarre, and I'm up on the third floor looking over the forest there. So can you tell us about a little bit about the ghost tour stuff and what happened? Because I missed it because I was sort of blowing my nose once every minute, so I didn't go.
Well, I can tell you first off about your own experience there, that behind the Spruce Hill Resort and Spa where we held it. Now, for people to understand, this resort is on the top of a hill, and it literally sits on 13,000 acres of land. That's a lot of land. And in behind that land, it's all mountainous. There is nothing going at that point northeast of where you were looking, because east would have been just a little bit more to the right of you from where you were staying. So there's no towns. The closest town that could light anything up in that area would be a city called Williams Lake, but that would have been north of you, and driving distance wise, it would have been about an hour driving distance. So we were able to, see if you could sometimes see the light there, but when things happen and lights are happening, and the moon, we knew from the night before, was coming up around 9:30, 10 o'clock, so it wouldn't have been the moon either.
Yeah, and it appeared to be maybe 150, 200 yards into the forest. It wasn't that far back from the forest, but it was very, very bizarre. I'd never sort of seen anything. And then the first thing I thought about was this Zendra, the idea of this sort of pitch blackness, and then this sort of looked like a fog, but a light fog, and all these sort of lights coming up from the forest. So it was very, very bizarre.
Now, as far as our ghost hunt last night, we went onto the Spruce Hill Resort property. This was an area that had never, ever been investigated before, complete virgin territory. So if you're a ghost hunter looking for fresh areas that have never been investigated, I say to everybody, head to the smaller areas, because you literally never know what you're going to run into. Now, on this trail, and this is actually quite a funny story, we were walking along the original Gold Rush Trail. Now, for our American listeners who are tuning in, this is a trail that literally started in California and Nevada and then worked its way up north to the Klondike and eventually Alaska. Well, the town I live in runs right parallel to it. And so we were able, with the resort being right on that property where the Gold Rush runs through, we were able to investigate this for the first time. So we had about 8 people on our tour last night. And because we're in the middle of nowhere, we actually had 2 armed guards with us. And they were packing rifles. And the reason why is, if you don't know where I live, we have a lot of bears, a lot of cougars, grizzly bears, moose, bobcats, lynx, and by the way, on the property, there is a wolf pack. So there's a lot of things that